Control isn't taken from you. You give it away. Think about the last big decision you made, the job you took, the person you trusted, the thing you bought. You thought it was your choice, but it wasn't. Because in the real world, influence isn't loud. It's invisible. And the most dangerous minds use it without you ever noticing. These aren't just tricks. They're the same tactics used by cult leaders, political operatives, and master manipulators, designed to make you believe their ideas are your own. In this video, you'll learn 7 dark psychology tactics, how to spot them, shut them down, and take back control of your own mind. Because if you don't know the rules of manipulation, you're not in the game, you're the prize. Gaslighting is a psychological manipulation technique that makes someone question the very ground they stand on. It doesn't start with a lie. It starts with subtle contradiction. You say, "I remember you said this." They say, "No, I didn't." You say, "But I saw it happen." They say, "You imagined it." At first, it's confusing. Then it's disorienting. Eventually, it becomes identity-breaking. This tactic is devastating because it targets your perception, the foundation of your decisions, your emotions, your beliefs. And once that's compromised, mind becomes more vulnerable to outside influence. Now let's look at a historical example. Catherine de' Medici, the Queen Mother of France in the 16th century. She wasn't a warrior. She didn't rule with armies. She ruled with influence, by making her enemies question reality. She was notorious for using misinformation, altered letters, and fabricated stories to confuse political rivals. She would tell one noble that another had betrayed him, without evidence. Then she'd do the opposite. Paranoia spread. Alliances fractured. No one knew who to trust. And in the chaos, Catherine's influence grew. This kind of manipulation often starts by controlling the narrative. When challenged, the manipulator avoids direct confrontation. Instead, they redirect. They express calm disagreement with phrases like, "That's not quite how I remember it," or "I think you might be overthinking it." Next, they may try to isolate a person's perception. If someone starts seeking outside perspectives, they might subtly dismiss them. Repeated enough, this can cause even confident individuals to second-guess their reality. Used manipulatively, gaslighting can erode trust in one's own judgment, creating an unhealthy dependence on someone else's version of truth. And in those moments of uncertainty, influence takes root. If gaslighting breaks the mind, love bombing hijacks the heart. This is the emotional trap, the high, the drug. It begins with excess, a flood of compliments, intense, undivided attention, texts, calls, gifts, praise, all delivered with precision. The target becomes the center of a glittering universe, showered in affirmation and desire. Then, without warning, the warmth fades. Silence, distance, coldness. Caught off guard, they begin to chase, replaying every moment, scrutinizing words, actions, omissions, desperate to pinpoint the misstep. That confusion becomes the hook, and once it's in, it holds fast. The psychological engine behind this is called intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism used in slot machines and gambling. It's not constant reward that breeds obsession. It's unpredictable reward. Historical case? Let's talk about Rasputin, the mystic who embedded himself in the Russian royal family. He would lavish attention on the Tsarina Alexandra, making her feel spiritually seen, then disappear, then return with cryptic affection. He created emotional scarcity, making her dependent on his presence for peace. That dependence gave him power over the empire itself. This kind of pattern begins with overwhelming validation and connection, then slowly introduces withdrawal. The highs and lows create a cycle where the person starts tying their sense of worth to another's unpredictable attention. Over time, the reward pattern becomes internalized. Even when the affection fades, they continue to seek it, blaming themselves for the emotional distance rather than recognizing the manipulation. They don't always see it for what it is. They may even call it passion, intensity, or fate. And that's where the real power of the tactic lies, not in domination, but in quiet, willing dependence. Not all chains are made of iron. Some are woven from guilt. This is one of the oldest tactics in psychological warfare. It doesn't attack your mind. It attacks your self-worth. And once that's compromised, you'll walk into submission willingly. Guilt says, you did something wrong. Shame says, you are something wrong. Now mix both with a touch of emotional blackmail, and you get a person who'll sacrifice their own desires just to feel like they're enough. One of the most sophisticated users of this tactic? Emperor Marcus Aurelius's wife, Faustina the Younger. Historical accounts, though debated, describe her as emotionally manipulative. She allegedly used guilt to keep the emperor under control, reminding him of her sacrifices, her pain, her loyalty, all while aligning herself with political allies in secret. He ruled an empire, but she ruled his mind. So how does this tactic manifest? It rarely involves direct commands. Instead, it reframes a person's moral compass. The message becomes, if you were a good person, you'd do this. That's the trap. Because now, resisting doesn't feel like standing up for oneself. It feels like being cruel or selfish. Phrases like, after everything I've done for you, I guess I just don't matter. I would never treat you that way. Each one acts like a mirror, and each time someone looks into it, they see a version of themselves they want to avoid. That emotional tension is the mechanism of control. This form of manipulation often targets identity. The more someone wants to be seen as kind, loyal, or generous, the more easily their values can be turned into pressure points. No loud demands are needed. Just a sigh, a disappointed look, strategic silence. These subtle cues speak louder than any command, and often cut deeper. Eventually, the person gives in, not because they genuinely agree, but because they can't bear the emotional weight. They may call it love, or duty, or doing the right thing. But beneath it all, the choice wasn't truly theirs. If guilt causes people to bend, jealousy makes them burn. Triangulation is the dark art of psychological imbalance, turning validation into a competition and watching people destroy themselves for your attention. There's no need to insult someone directly. Just praise another person. Just loud enough. Just often enough. Did you see how quickly she solved that? He really knows how to handle pressure. Not everyone can be that focused. The message is clear. Someone else is winning. The person on the receiving end doesn't get angry at you. They start turning inward, questioning their worth. Or worse, they redirect their resentment toward the one being praised. they begin to feel replaceable. And when someone feels replaceable, they may go to great lengths to prove otherwise. A historical tactician of this kind? Cleopatra. She didn't just seduce Rome's most powerful men, Caesar and Antony. She made them jealous of each other. She'd praise one in front of the other, compare their intellect, their power, their passion. She used triangulation not just to seduce, but to dominate. Each man fought harder, not for her love, but for her approval. Triangulation works by introducing a third figure to unsettle emotional certainty, creating insecurity. And insecurity drives action. It starts with contrast, subtly highlighting someone else's strengths. Then comes observation, seeing whether the target withdraws or competes. In either case, the approval they're chasing gains value. When that approval is given sparingly, self-worth becomes tied to winning attention back, even when it was never truly lost. Over time, this scarcity fuels obsession. As long as that third presence, real or imagined, lingers in their mind, the cycle continues, because the fear of losing something irreplaceable only deepens attachment. Fear is the oldest form of control. Before laws, before institutions, before manipulation even had a name, fear ruled everything. And in many ways, it still does. Fear bypasses logic. It shuts down reasoning and triggers compliance. It makes people freeze, submit, panic. But perhaps most importantly, it makes them seek safety. It makes them look for someone to follow. In a world full of threats, the person who offers certainty holds power. One historical master of this tactic was Cardinal Richelieu, the 17th century statesman who shaped the power of the French monarchy. He wasn't the king, but many believe he was the one pulling the strings behind the throne. How did he do it? By amplifying anxiety. He portrayed any political opposition as a threat to the crown, and by extension, a threat to France itself. Disagreement became danger. Dissent became treason. He created the idea of invisible enemies, conspiracies, plots, whispers, real or imagined. The goal wasn't chaos, but the prevention of chaos. And that word, prevention, was his justification. He didn't need actual fires to gain control. He just needed people to smell smoke. In modern psychological terms, this tactic revolves around anxiety induction. It begins with uncertainty, vague threats, subtle warnings, unconfirmed rumors. The fear doesn't need to overwhelm, it just needs to linger. Phrases like, "I just don't want to see you get hurt," or "I'm not saying it's true, but if it is," act as seeds of unease. Once that anxiety grows, people naturally seek reassurance. The one who stirred the tension can then step in as the calm, clear voice, becoming a source of comfort and authority. It's not about loud threats, but quiet tension and gradual relief. Over time, associating one person with emotional safety can lead to unquestioning loyalty, not from force, but because fear made every other option feel unbearable. People don't repay favors, they repay control. Reciprocity is one of the most underestimated weapons in dark psychology. It doesn't force, threaten, or guilt. It simply offers, and that offer becomes the leash. A small gift, a kind word, an unprompted gesture. Each can spark a quiet sense of indebtedness, not because repayment was requested, but because the recipient assumes a debt now exists. In such exchanges, what appears to be generosity can function more like an investment. The return is not gratitude, but leverage, often acquired at minimal cost. Let's go back to ancient China. During the Warring States period, diplomat Su Qin unified 6 kingdoms against the state of Qin, not by war, but by influence. He offered advice, flattery, and small political gestures. The kings, flattered and grateful, gave him power, titles, trust. By the time they realized he'd manipulated them into an alliance that served his agenda, it was too late. He gave first, then he collected. It starts with a gift, time, praise, protection, offered freely, making the recipient feel valued. Declining repayment with "you don't owe me anything" often deepens the sense of debt, shifting it from practical to personal. Later, that debt is activated with requests framed as trust or importance. For those who value fairness, compliance feels natural, even though the obligation was self-imposed. This is influence built not on force, but on turning generosity into a leash. People don't chase value. They chase what might disappear. Scarcity is the psychological pressure point that flips logic into desperation. It makes someone act fast, commit blindly, and submit fully, not because something is worth more, but because they fear it won't be around tomorrow. Loss aversion is even worse. Studies show that the pain of losing something is twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining it. Take something away, and it becomes priceless, even if it meant nothing before. This principle built empires. Take Genghis Khan. He weaponized scarcity and loss. When his army approached a city, he sent a simple message: surrender or be erased. He didn't negotiate. He didn't offer incentives. He offered extinction. His legend spread faster than his troops. Villages surrendered before a single arrow was fired. Why? Because he made the cost of resistance too high. People didn't follow him out of admiration. They followed him to avoid losing everything. The manipulator creates limits. They say less, offer less. They make their time, attention, or approval hard to access, then grant it briefly so others get a taste. That brief access feels rare, then it's taken away. They avoid long explanations or apologies. The result is uncertainty. People stop focusing on what they want and start worrying about losing what they've been given. That uncertainty becomes leverage. When the manipulator reappears, people are more likely to cling to access or respond quickly. That's the force of scarcity in action. It doesn't require being the best. It relies on the prospect of a future without the thing or person. If you made it this far, your mind isn't average. It's dangerous. You've just seen how influence is built, how people are controlled, and how power operates in silence. Most will forget this video. You won't. And that's what separates the pawn from the player. Subscribe, not for hype, but for insight. Every week, I share what most people overlook, and what some hope stays hidden. Now I want to hear from you. Which tactic hit the hardest? Drop it in the comments. Let's see who's really paying attention. because silence is no longer power. Awareness is.